wash my clothes, and make breakfast. My wife's sister, who lived in my house for free, told me that when she tried to humiliate me, she ended up exposing herself in front of everyone. My wife stood to defend her, but I made her sit back down with just one sentence. Look, I'm not saying I'm a saint. I've made plenty of questionable decisions in my life. Like that time I thought cargo shorts were making a comeback, or when I invested in my buddy's revolutionary beer helmet company that went bankrupt in 3 months. But letting my sister-in-law move into my house, that wasn't just questionable. That was straight-up stupidity wrapped in a family obligation vow, and I was about to pay the price for it in ways that would make a loan shark look generous. It was a Tuesday morning, which already meant the universe was against me because nothing good ever happens on a Tuesday. Mondays get all the hate, but Tuesdays? They're the annoying younger sibling that flies under the radar while causing twice the chaos. I was standing in my kitchen, minding my own business, trying to decide if I had time to make actual breakfast or if I was going to be a grown man eating a protein bar in my car again like some kind of divorced dad with commitment issues. That's when I heard it. The voice that could curdle milk and kill houseplants. Wash my clothes and make breakfast. Harper's voice came screeching down from the top of the stairs like she was summoning servants in some twisted medieval kingdom where entitlement was currency and self-awareness was a myth. I looked up, and there she was in all her glory, standing at the top of MY stairs, in MY house, wearing a bathrobe that cost more than my first car, tied around her waist like she was some kind of Roman emperor about to decree which gladiator lives and which one becomes lion food. Her hair was piled on top of her head in one of those messy buns that somehow cost 45 minutes and 16 YouTube tutorials to achieve, and her phone. Oh, her phone was glued to her hand like it had been surgically attached at birth. She stood there with the confidence of someone who'd never paid a bill in their life, never scrubbed a toilet at 2 in the morning because the guests were coming over in 6 hours, never experienced the unique joy of discovering you're out of toilet paper at the worst possible moment. No, Harper lived in a world where problems solved themselves and other people existed solely to make her life easier. Excuse me, I asked, setting down my coffee mug with the kind of careful precision you use when you're trying really hard not to throw something across the room. You heard me, she said, not even bothering to look up from whatever Instagram post she was probably creating about her morning routine that definitely didn't include basic human decency or, God forbid, doing her own laundry. It's the least you can do since I'm watching over the house while you play Mr. Big Job at work. I'm going to let that sink in for a second, she said, watching over the house. Like my house was a small child that needed supervision. Like without her royal presence, my walls would spontaneously combust and my appliances would stage a revolt. This woman genuinely believed that her mere existence in my home was some kind of service she was providing, like she was a security system that ate all my food and complained about the Wi-Fi speed. I smiled. Not because I was happy, oh no. I smiled because I'd been practicing that smile in the mirror for the last 3 days, the kind of smile you give someone when you know something they don't. The kind of smile that says, oh honey, you have no idea what's coming. It was calm, collected, the smile of a man who'd already decided that this was Harper's final week freeloading under my roof, drinking my overpriced oat milk, and treating my guest bedroom like it was a luxury apartment in Manhattan that she was generously gracing with her presence. See, Harper had moved in temporarily 6 months ago. 6 months. She'd shown up on our doorstep with 3 suitcases, mascara running down her face, and a sob story about being between jobs. In Harper's world, between jobs meant I quit my last job because my boss asked me to actually work during work hours, and now I'm going to take an extended vacation funded by my sister's husband while I figure out how to become an Instagram influencer or marry rich, whichever comes first. My wife, Sophie, bless her heart, she's got one of those hearts that's too big for her own good, kept saying, she just needs time, babe. She's going through something. And because I'm not a complete monster, and because I actually love my wife even when she's defending the indefensible, I said okay. I said sure. I said it's just temporary. Well, 6 months of unpaid rent, passive-aggressive sticky notes on my food in my own refrigerator, bathroom products that cost more than my car payment, and enough attitude to fill a football stadium later, I'd done the math. Time was up. The free trial of living rent-free in Ryan's house while treating him like the help had officially expired, and unlike most subscription services, there wasn't going to be an automatic renewal. During those 6 months, I'd watched Harper transform from a supposedly job-hunting adult woman into what I can only describe as a professional mooch with delusions of grandeur. She'd wake up at noon, spend 3 hours getting ready to go to what she called networking brunches, but what I'm 99% sure were just regular brunches where she complained about how hard it is to be her, then come home and take a 4-hour nap before binge-watching reality TV shows and online shopping with a credit card that I'm pretty sure was maxed out somewhere around month 2. She'd been between jobs for so long that I was starting to think the jobs were the lucky ones for dodging that bullet. And the chores? Oh, the chores. The woman acted like household tasks were some kind of extreme sport designed to break the human spirit. I once asked her to load the dishwasher. Just load it, not even run it. And she looked at me like I'd asked her to perform open-heart surgery using only a spork in a YouTube tutorial. But the worst part, the part that really got under my skin like a splinter you can't quite reach, was the entitlement. It wasn't just that she didn't contribute. It was that she genuinely believed she was doing us a favor by allowing us to house, feed, and financially support her lifestyle. In Harper's mind, we should have been grateful for the opportunity to watch her live her best life on our dime. So yeah, when she stood at the top of those stairs demanding breakfast and laundry service like I was running a bed and breakfast specifically designed for entitled 20-somethings who'd never heard of the concept of consequences, I smiled. Because I knew what she didn't know. The eviction wasn't going to be formal. It was going to be so much better than that. I had exactly 45 minutes to get to work for a client meeting that could either make or break a deal I'd been working on for 3 months, which in business time is roughly equivalent to gestating a small mammal. I was halfway to the door, car keys in hand, mentally rehearsing my pitch about integrated marketing solutions, because apparently, that's what we call helping people sell stuff. Now to justify charging them obscene amounts of money, when Sophie's voice stopped me dead in my tracks. Dad's hosting dinner tonight. I froze. Those 4 words carried the same energy as "we need to talk," or "I'm not mad, I'm disappointed," or "the IRS would like a word." Nothing good ever followed that sentence structure. Nothing. I turned around slowly, like someone in a horror movie who knows they're about to see something terrible but can't help themselves. Sophie was standing in the hallway with that look on her face. The one that said she already knew I wasn't going to like what came next, but was going to tell me anyway, because that's what marriage is, apparently. A series of moments where you deliver bad news to each other and then pretend it's all part of the adventure. Okay, I said carefully, the way you'd respond to someone telling you they saw a suspicious package on the subway. That's nice. Tell him I said. Everyone has to come, she interrupted, emphasizing the word everyone like it was written in capital letters with an exclamation point and maybe some threatening emojis. He said no excuses. Translation: Harper wants an audience. This wasn't a family dinner. This was a performance, a theatrical production where I was cast as the villain without anyone bothering to send me the script. I could already see it. Harper sitting there with her practiced, wounded expression, probably wearing something deliberately cute and vulnerable looking, spinning stories about how I'd been so mean to her, so unreasonable, such a tyrant in my own house that I paid for with my own money. Can't make it, I said, jingling my keys hopefully. Got a meeting that could actually, pay for the mortgage, and the electricity, and the water bill that somehow tripled since Harper discovered that hour-long showers are a form of self-care. Sophie gave me the look. You know the one. The look that says, I'm asking you nicely right now, but I have the power to make the next month of your life significantly more difficult if you don't comply. It's the same look that convinced me to go to her cousin's wedding where I knew exactly 0 people and had to make small talk with strangers about whether I thought Brad and Jennifer were really happy or just faking it for the Instagram photos. Ryan, she said, using my actual name instead of babe or honey, which is marriage code for, this is serious and you're about to do what I'm asking whether you like it or not. It's one dinner. Dad specifically asked for you to be there. Besides, you've been working late all week. Yeah, working late to avoid coming home to Harper's one-woman show of everything I do is someone else's problem. But I couldn't exactly say that without starting a whole thing, and I didn't have time for a whole thing. I had barely enough time for a partial thing, maybe a quarter thing at best. Fine. I said, because I'm nothing if not a man who knows when he's beaten. But I'm coming home after the meeting to change. I'm not showing up to this ambush in my work clothes smelling like conference room coffee and broken dreams. Fast forward 5 hours, and I was pulling into my own driveway like a prisoner returning to the scene of his crimes. Except I hadn't committed any crimes unless you counted the crime of expecting basic human gratitude and maybe some help with the dishes occasionally. The meeting had gone well. Great, actually. We'd closed the deal, shook hands, did that weird business casual celebratory thing where everyone's excited but trying not to show it because showing emotions in corporate America is apparently a sign of weakness. I walked into my house and immediately knew something was wrong. I could feel it the way animals can sense an earthquake before it hits. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, the kind Harper bought online using what I'm pretty sure was a credit card that should have been declined somewhere around February. And I could hear music playing upstairs. Not just any music. Taylor Swift. Which meant Harper was in a mood. And when Harper was in a mood, everyone else had to deal with the fallout. I found her in the guest bedroom. Excuse me, her room, as she'd started calling it somewhere around month 3, like claiming territory in someone else's house was a totally normal thing to do. She was strutting around in one of Sophie's silk robes, the expensive one we'd gotten her for her birthday, humming and pretending to fold clothes. I say pretending because what she was actually doing was picking up one shirt, looking at it thoughtfully for 30 seconds like it was a museum piece, then putting it down in a slightly different location and calling that cleaning. She looked up when I walked past, gave me this smug little smile that made me want to check if my bank account had mysteriously been drained, and went back to her performance of girl who definitely has her life together and is not at all freeloading off her sister's husband. By 6 p.m., we were in the car, and I was already regretting every life choice that had led me to this moment. The traffic was terrible because of course it was. The universe has a sense of humor, and that sense of humor involves making you sit in gridlock when you're already dreading your destination. Sophie was in the passenger seat scrolling through her phone, probably looking at Pinterest boards of throw pillows or whatever it is people look at when they're avoiding conversation. And Harper? Harper was in the back seat acting like she was heading to her coronation instead of a family dinner where I was apparently going to be put on trial for the crime of existing in my own house with expectations of basic human decency. She scrolled through her phone with those artificial nails that clicked against the screen. Click, 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 like a countdown timer to my impending doom. Then she did that thing where she took a breath before speaking that let me know she'd been rehearsing this line, probably in front of the mirror while wearing my wife's robe. Just so you know, Ryan, she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness like artificial sweetener in gas station coffee. Dad agrees with me. You've been distant, selfish, and ungrateful. I kept my eyes on the road, mostly because I didn't trust myself to look at her without my face betraying exactly what I was thinking, which was approximately 73 different variations of, "Are you actually serious right now?" I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, counted to 5 in my head, a technique my therapist taught me that I'd been using a lot lately, and responded with the kind of calm that only comes from knowing you're about to win a game the other person doesn't even know they're playing. Really? I said, my voice so even it could have been used to calibrate audio equipment. I thought being the guy who pays the mortgage, the bills, and the grocery tabs was peak selfishness these days. My bad. Next time I'll just let the bank foreclose, and we can all live in a cardboard box together. Very egalitarian. She blinked, her perfectly applied mascara not even flickering, then muttered something under her breath about men who think money replaces family. I caught the words because she wanted me to catch them, wanted me to take the bait and start an argument right there in the car so she could tell everyone how volatile and unreasonable I was. I didn't answer. I just smiled at the road ahead, hands steady on the wheel, because tonight she was going to learn the difference between family and freeloaders, and I was going to enjoy every single second of it. We pulled up to Frank and Linda's house, and I could already tell this was going to be one of those nights that I'd either laugh about years from now or need intensive therapy to process. Probably both. The porch light was on, casting that warm, welcoming glow that was about as genuine as a politician's smile during election season. Their house was one of those suburban cookie-cutter numbers that looked like it had been ordered from a catalog titled Middle Class Dreams and Mortgage Payments. White picket fence, manicured lawn that Frank probably woke up at 6 a.m. on Saturdays to maintain, and a doormat that said "Welcome" in cursive font like it was a legally binding contract. Frank was already at the door before we even made it up the walkway, which meant he'd been watching for us through the window like a suburban surveillance system. The man had a sixth sense for family arriving, probably developed from years of hosting dinners where he could control the narrative and pretend everything was fine while slowly dying inside from the weight of maintaining appearances. I respected it, honestly. Takes dedication to be that committed to denial. "Harper, you look great," he bellowed, arms spread wide like she was a soldier returning from war instead of a grown woman who'd been living rent-free in someone else's house for half a year. He wrapped her in one of those big dad hugs, the kind that lifts you slightly off the ground and makes you feel like you're still 12 years old and haven't yet disappointed everyone with your life choices. Then he turned to me. "Hey, Ryan." Not, "Ryan, good to see you," or "Ryan, thanks for coming." Just, "Hey, Ryan." The verbal equivalent of a lukewarm handshake from someone who's contractually obligated to acknowledge your existence but would rather not. He gave me this nod, the kind of nod you give the mailman when he delivers a package, but you're not quite sure if you're supposed to tip him or just say thanks and close the door. I nodded back, because I'm a professional at this point. 6 months of Harper's residency had turned me into an expert at swallowing my pride and pretending everything was fine when it absolutely was not fine. I could have won an Oscar for my performance in Man Who Is Definitely Not Bothered by the Fact that his in-laws have already decided he's the problem without hearing his side of the story. Inside, the house smelled like Linda had been cooking since dawn. Roasted beef, garlic, something with rosemary that made my stomach growl despite the fact that I was walking into what was essentially my own trial. The dining table looked like it had been styled for a magazine photo shoot. Candles flickering just right. The good china that only came out for holidays and important occasions. Apparently, Let's Gang Up on Ryan qualified as an important occasion. Matching cloth napkins that probably cost more than my first apartment's security deposit, and a centerpiece that looked suspiciously like something Linda had seen on Pinterest and spent 4 hours recreating. This was the classic fake family unity setup, the kind where everything looks perfect on the surface, but underneath there's enough tension to power a small city. I'd seen this movie before. Hell, I'd starred in this movie before, back when Sophie and I first started dating, and I had to prove myself worthy of their daughter like I was a knight trying to win the princess's hand in some medieval romance novel. Except the dragon was student loan debt, and the castle was a two-bedroom apartment with questionable plumbing. Harper dropped into her seat beside Frank like she owned the place, which apparently was her default setting everywhere she went. She'd probably sit in the Oval Office chair if given the opportunity and start rearranging the furniture while complaining that the presidential salary wasn't enough to support her lifestyle. Sophie took the seat on Harper's other side, forming this little alliance wall that would have made NATO jealous, and I got directed to the chair directly across from them. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and can immediately tell that people have been talking about you? That weird energy in the air that's part awkward, part hostile, and entirely uncomfortable? Yeah, that was the vibe. I was sitting at the outsider's end of the table, strategically positioned so that I was facing the firing squad while they got to sit there in their comfortable little coalition of Ryan is the problem, and we're all going to pretend this is a normal dinner. Linda brought out the food. She'd outdone herself, I had to admit. The woman could cook. Roasted beef that looked like it had been photographed for a food blog, roasted vegetables that were somehow both crispy and tender, mashed potatoes so creamy they could have doubled as a face cream in one of those expensive department stores Harper liked to browse through without buying anything. Fresh rolls, real butter, the works. This was the kind of meal you made when you were either celebrating something wonderful or about to drop a bomb on someone's life. Given the seating arrangement, I was betting on the latter. Dinner began with that awkward quiet phase where everyone's focused on passing dishes and filling plates because no one wants to be the first to speak and break the fragile illusion of civility. The only sounds were forks scraping plates, the occasional "could you pass the salt?" and Harper's phone buzzing every 30 seconds because apparently, even at family dinner, she couldn't disconnect from whatever Instagram drama was unfolding in her digital universe. I took a bite of beef. It was perfect. Tender, seasoned just right, probably cooked for hours. I almost felt bad that such a good meal was being wasted on what was clearly an ambush disguised as family bonding. Linda deserved better than to have her culinary efforts overshadowed by whatever theatrical performance Harper had planned for the evening. Then Harper cleared her throat. It wasn't a natural throat clearing, like when you've got something stuck or you're about to speak. No, this was a dramatic throat clearing, the kind actors do on stage when they want the audience to pay attention. The kind that says, "I'm about to say something I've been rehearsing all day and I need everyone to stop what they're doing and focus on me." Everyone stopped eating. Forks paused midair. Even Linda, who'd been in the kitchen grabbing something, poked her head around the corner. Harper had commanded the room's attention without saying a single word, which I had to admit was impressive in a deeply annoying sort of way. "Dad," she began, and I could already hear the victim tone creeping in her voice like poison ivy climbing up a garden wall. "You wouldn't believe what Ryan said this morning. Here it comes. The main event. The reason we were all gathered here tonight, dressed in our nice clothes, eating expensive food, pretending this was about family togetherness when it was really about Harper needing validation for her lifestyle choices and me being cast as the villain in her self-produced drama." I leaned back in my chair, took a long, deliberate sip of water from my glass, and met her eyes across the table. I could see Sophie tensing beside her, probably preparing to play referee or defender or whatever role she'd assigned herself in this scenario. Frank was leaning forward slightly, his face already forming into that concerned dad expression that said he was ready to be disappointed in me before I'd even opened my mouth. "Go ahead, Harper," I said, my voice so calm it could have been used in a meditation app. I set my water glass down gently, smiled. Not a big smile, just a small one, the kind that says I'm not worried because I know exactly how this is going to end, and gestured toward her like I was giving her the floor at a business presentation. "Let's give the TED Talk version. I'm sure everyone would love to hear your perspective on modern living arrangements and the concept of mutual respect." Harper grinned like she'd just won the lottery, except the lottery was most dramatic performance in a suburban dining room, and the grand prize was everyone's undivided attention while she painted herself as the victim of my apparent tyranny. She took a breath, probably the same breath she'd practiced in the mirror 17 times before we left the house, and launched into her monologue. "He refused to make breakfast for me this morning," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of wounded innocence usually reserved for Hallmark movie heroines who just discovered their small-town bakery is being bought out by a big corporation. "Can you believe that? I asked for one simple thing, just breakfast, and he told me I should eat cereal. Like I'm some kind of child." The irony of that statement was so thick you could have spread it on toast, but nobody else seemed to catch it. Frank's frown deepened, creating those lines in his forehead that made him look like a disappointed basset hound who'd just discovered his owner forgot to buy dog treats. Linda made this little sympathetic noise from the kitchen doorway, the kind of sound mothers make when they think their baby bird has fallen from the nest, completely oblivious to the fact that this particular baby bird was 32 years old and perfectly capable of finding a worm on her own. "That true?" Frank asked, turning his attention to me like I was a witness being cross-examined in a courtroom drama, except the crime was apparently not being a short-order cook in my own house. "Yes," I said cheerfully, cutting into my beef with the precision of a surgeon who's done this operation 1,000 times. "It's absolutely true. Because the last time Harper touched a stove, she nearly called the fire department to ask which button starts boiling water. True story. The operator thought it was a prank call. I had to get on the phone and explain that no, this was a genuine emergency of incompetence. And yes, we were all as baffled as they were." Sophie glared at me from across the table, her eyes shooting daggers that would have killed me if looks were actual weapons and not just metaphorical expressions of disapproval. Harper's smirk didn't falter, though. If anything, it grew wider, like she thought my honesty was just digging my grave deeper. Frank looked between us like a tennis match spectator who wasn't quite sure which player to root for, but was pretty sure someone was about to get smashed. I smiled back at all of them, took another bite of beef, and waited. Because here's what they didn't know. I wasn't playing defense anymore. I'd spent 6 months playing defense, dodging Harper's accusations, making excuses, trying to keep the peace for Sophie's sake. But tonight I was playing offense, and I'd brought receipts, literally and figuratively. Dinner continued, though the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with Linda's good silverware. Harper, sensing she had the floor and wasn't about to give it up, launched into what I can only describe as the most delusional career update I'd ever heard. She talked about modeling opportunities that I'm 99% sure were just Instagram accounts that reposted her selfies without permission. She mentioned brand collabs that consisted of her tagging companies in posts hoping they'd notice her and send free stuff, which they never did because even marketing departments have standards. And I've been networking like crazy, she continued, gesturing with her fork like she was conducting an orchestra of her own importance. These brunches I go to, they're not just brunches, Dad. They're investment opportunities. You never know who you're going to meet. Influencers, entrepreneurs, people who are really doing things in this world. Yeah, people who are really doing things like paying for their own mimosas and not mooching off their relatives. I thought, but didn't say. Growth, remember? Personal growth. My therapist would be so proud. I've got this whole strategy mapped out, Harper went on, apparently unable to stop herself now that she had an audience. 6 months from now, I'm going to be big. Like, really big. I'm talking sponsorships, partnerships, maybe even my own product line. 6 months from now, she'd been saying that for the past 6 months. But again, growth. I kept my mouth shut and focused on my mashed potatoes, which were innocent bystanders in this whole mess and didn't deserve to be collateral damage in Harper's fantasy world presentation. Then, because the universe has a sense of timing, Harper turned her attention directly to me. Her eyes lit up with that particular gleam that meant she was about to try to take me down a peg, to remind everyone at the table that whatever success I had was somehow less legitimate than her imaginary empire of Instagram fame and networking brunches. So, Ryan, she said, drawing out my name like it was a punchline she'd been waiting to deliver. How's your little company? Still pretending to be a CEO? The table went quiet. Even the candles seemed to stop flickering. Sophie's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Linda's eyes went wide. Frank leaned back in his chair, probably preparing to mediate whatever was about to happen, because even he could sense that Harper had just poked a bear that had been sitting quietly in the corner, minding its own business. I smiled. Not a smirk, not a grin. A genuine smile. The kind you give someone when they've just walked right into the trap you'd been carefully setting for months. I set down my fork, wiped my mouth with the overpriced cloth napkin, and looked directly at Harper. Still running it. I said casually, like we were discussing the weather or the latest episode of whatever reality show she was binging. Actually, funny you should ask. We just closed a deal this afternoon, right before I came home to change for this lovely dinner. Oh, Harper said, her voice trying to sound interested but coming across as condescending, like a kindergarten teacher asking a kid what they learned at school today. What kind of deal? I paused, took a sip of wine. Frank had broken out the good stuff, which I appreciated even if the company was questionable. And let the moment breathe. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. The moment when all of Harper's assumptions about my little company and my pretend CEO status came crashing down like a house of cards built on lies and delusion. Worth about 250 grand, I said, as casually as if I'd just mentioned I'd picked up milk on the way home. The fork fell out of Harper's hand. It didn't just slip, it dropped like her entire grip on reality had suddenly malfunctioned. It clattered against her plate with a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the dining room. Her mouth opened slightly, forming a perfect O of shock that would have been comical if it wasn't so satisfying. Frank blinked rapidly, like someone had just shined a flashlight in his eyes. 250 what? He asked, his voice caught somewhere between disbelief and awe. 1,000, I clarified, going back to cutting my beef like I hadn't just dropped a financial bomb in the middle of their suburban dining room. 250,000. We've been working on this client for 3 months, and it finally came through today. Pretty good for a little company, don't you think? Sophie looked like she'd just witnessed a magic trick she couldn't explain, her eyes wide and her mouth slightly open. I hadn't told her about the deal yet, wanted to wait until it was signed and sealed, because I've learned the hard way that celebrating too early is just asking the universe to pull the rug out from under you. But seeing her expression now, the mixture of surprise and pride, made me wish I'd told her earlier just to see that look twice. Wow, Harper finally managed to say, her voice stiff and mechanical like a robot trying to process information that didn't compute with its programming. Good for you. That's That's really great. Thanks, I said, smiling warmly like we were actually having a pleasant family dinner instead of a strategic warfare session disguised as beef Wellington. I'm thinking of using some of that money to pay for the rent your sister forgot to collect for the past 6 months. The wine glass in Linda's hand stopped mid-pour. Frank's fork paused in midair. Sophie's face went from proud to pale in about 2 seconds flat. Oh, I added, because when you're already burning bridges you might as well throw some gasoline on the fire. And maybe I'll frame the overdue bills Harper's been hiding from you guys. They'll look great next to those family portraits in the hallway. Really tie the room together. Harper's face froze mid-smile, stuck somewhere between her practiced charm and genuine panic. Her carefully constructed narrative was crumbling faster than a sandcastle at high tide, and everyone could see it. And Frank leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his expression shifting from disappointed dad to confused dad to slowly understanding dad. What bills? He asked. Bingo. You know that moment in movies when the detective finally reveals who the killer is and everyone gasps because the clues were there all along, but nobody put them together? This was that moment, except instead of a murder mystery, it was a financial fraud investigation, and instead of a smoking gun, I had 6 months of bank statements and a sister-in-law who was about to learn that the internet never forgets, and neither do digital banking records. I pulled out my phone with the kind of casual confidence that comes from knowing you're holding a royal flush, while everyone else is bluffing with a pair of twos. The screen lit up, illuminating my face in that slightly ominous way that probably made me look like a villain in a superhero movie, but honestly, I didn't care. Sometimes being the villain feels pretty damn good, especially when you're the villain who's actually been telling the truth the whole time. Frank, I said, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand. Let me show you something interesting. You know how Harper told you she was paying me back for rent every month? How she's been so responsible and independent and totally getting her life together. Harper's eyes went wide. Not just wide, they went full deer in headlights, caught. In 4K, oh crap, I didn't think actually kept records wide. Her hand reached for her wine glass, missed, and then found it on the second try, which would have been funny if the whole situation wasn't already comedy gold. Ryan, Sophie started, her voice carrying that warning tone that wives develop after years of marriage, the one that says, whatever you're about to do, think very carefully about whether you want to sleep on the couch for the next month. Just showing him the facts, babe, I said, keeping my tone light and breezy like I was showing Frank vacation photos instead of evidence of his daughter's freeloading lifestyle. Transparency is important in families, right? That's what we always say. I pulled up my banking app. Thank God for technology making it easy to destroy someone's lives with a few swipes and taps, and navigated to the transfers section. 6 months of transactions, all lined up like soldiers at attention, each one labeled clearly, each one a monument to my stupid generosity and Harper's shameless manipulation. I turned the phone toward Frank, tilting it slightly so the candlelight didn't create too much glare. See these? Every single month, like clockwork. $1,200. That's the rent we agreed on when Harper moved in temporarily. I made air quotes with my free hand, because that word temporarily had been doing more heavy lifting than an Olympic weightlifter on steroids. Frank squinted at the screen, his reading glasses perched on his nose making him look like a judge reviewing evidence in a particularly interesting case. His finger traced down the list of transactions, and I watched his face go through about 17 different emotions in the span of 5 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, anger, disappointment. It was like watching a time lapse of a man's faith in his daughter crumbling in real time. Every transaction, I continued, because when you've got momentum, you don't stop, is labeled rent, Harper. $1,200 times 6 months. That's $7,200, in case anyone's keeping track, which apparently only I was. Linda had moved from the kitchen doorway to stand behind Frank's chair, her hand on his shoulder, staring at my phone like it was a crystal ball revealing terrible futures. Sophie had gone completely still, her face unreadable, probably running calculations in her head about how to spin this or fix it or somehow make it not be as bad as it obviously was. Frank looked up from the phone, his eyes moving from the screen to Harper with the kind of slow, deliberate movement that indicated he was giving her one chance, one single chance, to explain how this wasn't exactly what it looked like. You told me you were paying him back, he said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a man who'd just realized he'd been lied to by his own daughter for half a year. You said you guys had worked it out. You said Ryan was fine with the arrangement and that you were being responsible. I meant to. Harper's voice came out higher than usual, cracking slightly like ice under too much pressure. She set her wine glass down hard enough that some of it sloshed over the rim and onto Linda's good tablecloth, creating a dark red stain that was probably going to be a pain to get out. I was going to pay him back. He said it was fine. He said I could take my time. I corrected, holding up one finger like a teacher making an important point, that I'd help you out until you got back on your feet. You know, found a job, started earning income, became a functioning adult member of society. The usual stuff people do when they're not professional couch surfers. I zoomed in on one of the transactions, the one from last month. See the date on this one? November 15th. You know what else happened on November 15th, Harper? She stared at me, her face a mixture of anger and panic, like she was trying to decide whether to double down on the lies or come clean. I didn't wait for her to answer. That was the day you posted those Instagram stories about your shopping haul from Nordstrom. The one where you bought $300 worth of clothes and tagged it, treating myself because I deserve it. I remember because Sophie showed me, and I remember thinking, huh, funny how she can afford Nordstrom but not rent. Frank sat back in his chair so hard I thought it might tip over. His face had gone from disappointed dad to I can't believe I raised someone who would do this, dad, which is a whole different level of parental disappointment. It's the level where they start questioning their entire parenting philosophy and wondering where they went wrong. So let me get this straight, Frank said, his voice taking on that dangerous calm that parents use right before they ground you for life. You've been living in Ryan's house, rent-free, for 6 months. You told us you were paying him back. You told us you were being responsible. And meanwhile, you've been shopping at Nordstrom and going to expensive brunches and buying God knows what else. It's not like that, Harper protested, her voice desperate now, the cool confidence from earlier evaporating faster than water on hot asphalt. You don't understand. Ryan twists things. He makes everything sound worse than it is. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest, the picture of calm reasonableness. You're absolutely right, Harper. I do twist things. I twist doorknobs when I come home to a house I pay for. I twist the cap off the milk that I bought with my own money. I twist the faucet handles when I pay the water bill. And yeah, I twist the truth sometimes. I twist it back into its actual shape after you've spent months bending it to fit your narrative. Sophie put her head in her hands. Linda looked like she wanted to disappear into the wallpaper. Frank just stared at Harper with the kind of disappointment that's going to fuel awkward family gatherings for the next decade. Dad, he's being unfair. Harper tried again, but her voice had lost its power. She sounded like a kid caught with her hand in the cookie jar, except the cookie jar was my bank account, and the cookies were thousands of dollars. Unfair? I asked, my eyebrows shooting up. You want to talk about unfair? Let's talk about how it's unfair that I work 50-hour weeks to pay for a house, where someone who contributes nothing treats me like the help. Let's talk about how it's unfair that I've been too polite to call you out for 6 months while you've been telling everyone I'm the problem. Let's talk about. Enough, Frank said, holding up his hand. He turned to Harper, and I saw something in his expression shift. It wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was resignation. The look of a parent who's finally accepting what they've probably known deep down for a while, but didn't want to admit. You've been lying to everyone, he said simply. To us. To Ryan. To your sister. About everything. Harper opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For the first time since I'd met her, Harper was actually genuinely speechless. And I tried not to smile, but honestly, it was pretty damn hard not to. The silence that followed Frank's statement was the kind of silence you could bottle and sell to people who meditate, except it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of a bomb that's already exploded and everyone's waiting to see what's still standing when the dust clears. Harper was opening and closing her mouth like a fish that had just been pulled out of water and was trying to remember how breathing worked, and honestly, it was the most satisfying thing I'd seen since I watched the series finale of that show where the bad guy actually got what he deserved. But here's the thing about momentum. Once you've got it, you don't let it go. You don't score one goal and then sit back and play defense for the rest of the game. No, you go for the throat. You finish what you started. And I wasn't done. Not even close. Actually, Frank, I said, holding up one finger in that wait. There's more gesture that infomercial hosts use when they're about to tell you about the bonus steak knives. Since we're in the spirit of honesty and transparency tonight. And this roast beef is fantastic. Linda, seriously, you outdid yourself. There's one more thing I think you should see. Harper's eyes went even wider, which I didn't think was physically possible, but apparently fear and panic can really expand those pupils. Ryan, don't, she said, and there was actual pleading in her voice now, which was a nice change from the entitled demands I'd been hearing for the past 6 months. Don't what? I asked innocently, already scrolling through my phone to find what I was looking for. Don't share relevant information with your parents? Don't clear up misunderstandings? Don't correct the record when people might have gotten the wrong impression about certain situations. Sophie's head came up from her hands, and she was looking at me with this expression that was half curiosity and half dread, like she couldn't decide if she wanted to know what I was about to reveal or if she wanted to grab the phone and throw it out the window. Frank had leaned forward again, his dinner completely forgotten, fully invested in this drama that was better than anything Netflix had put out in the last year. I found the screenshot I'd saved, because I'm not an idiot and I knew this day would come eventually, and turned my phone around again. Recognize this? It was Harper's Instagram post from 3 months ago, a selfie that she'd clearly spent 45 minutes staging to look casual and spontaneous. She was standing in front of my car. My black Audi that I'd saved for 2 years to buy, my baby that I washed every weekend and treated better than most people treat their children, with one hand on the hood, wearing oversized sunglasses and this smile that said she thought she was living her best life. But it wasn't just the photo. It was the caption. Oh, that beautiful, damning caption that I'd screenshot the moment I saw it because I knew it would come in handy someday. Frank squinted at the screen, reading slowly. Early birthday gift from my generous brother-in-law. He looked up at me, confused. You bought her a car? Nope, I said, popping the P with extra emphasis because I was enjoying this way too much and I'd stopped pretending otherwise. I didn't buy her a car. I didn't give her a car. I didn't even let her borrow the car long term. She asked to use it one afternoon to go shopping, said her friend was going to pick her up, but the friend canceled last minute. And could she please just use my car for a few hours because she had to pick up something important. I took a sip of wine, letting the suspense build like I was telling a ghost story around a campfire. Being the generous, trusting, soon-to-regret-it brother-in-law that I am, I said sure. Fine. Whatever. She took my keys, promised she'd be back in 2 hours, and then apparently decided to stage a photo shoot in a Target parking lot and tell the entire internet that I'd bought her a car. Linda gasped. Actually gasped. Like, hand to chest, pearl-clutching gasped. Sophie looked like she wanted to melt through her chair and into the floor and just keep going until she reached the Earth's core where she could live in molten rock rather than deal with this situation. My business partner saw it. I continued, because we weren't at the best part yet. Jim, you remember Jim. Frank, you met him at that barbecue last summer. He called me the next day and said, "Hey man, didn't know you were doing that well. When did you start giving away cars?" And I'm standing there confused, thinking maybe I had a stroke and forgot buying someone a vehicle. And then he sends me the screenshot. Frank was staring at the phone like it was personally offending him, which in a way, it was. His daughter had just been exposed as not only a freeloader, but also a liar and a fraud. And that's a tough pill to swallow when you're eating pot roast and trying to maintain the illusion that your family is normal and functional. She made me look like either a sugar daddy with terrible judgment or a guy who's so loaded he just throws cars at people for fun. I said, "Do you know how awkward it is to explain to your business partner that no, you didn't buy your sister-in-law a car, she just borrowed yours and decided to pretend you did on social media?" Jim thought I was either lying to him about my finances or having some kind of midlife crisis at 34. It was just for fun. Harper stammered, her voice getting that high-pitched quality that happens when someone's trying to defend the indefensible. It was a joke. Everyone knew I was joking. Really, I pulled the phone back and scrolled through the comments section, which I'd also screenshot because I'm thorough like that. Let's see what everyone thought. Here's your friend Jessica. OMG, so lucky. Wish I had a brother-in-law like that. Here's someone named Brad with 3 exclamation points. Goals. When am I getting a car? Oh, and here's my personal favorite from your friend Melissa. See, this is what family is supposed to do for each other. Taking notes. I looked up from the phone. Doesn't sound like anyone got the joke, Harper. Sounds like you made me look like a complete idiot to everyone who follows you, which according to your bio, is influencing 12K plus followers to live their best life. 12,000 people think I bought you a car. 12,000 people. Frank had gone from disappointed to angry, his face reddening in that way that suggested his blood pressure was doing things his doctor would definitely not approve of. Why would you do that? He asked Harper, his voice tight and controlled, which was somehow scarier than if he'd been yelling. Why would you lie about something like that? I didn't think it was a big deal, Harper said, but her voice was cracking now, the facade finally breaking after months of holding it together through sheer audacity and entitlement. I just wanted people think I'm successful. I wanted them to see that I'm doing well. But you're not doing well. Frank's voice rose, not quite yelling but getting close. You're lying on the internet, living rent-free off your sister's husband, and apparently spending money you don't have on clothes you don't need. That's not success, Harper. That's delusion. Frank. Linda started, her voice gentle, probably trying to de-escalate before this turned into a full-blown family meltdown. But Frank wasn't done. Do you have any idea what you've done to this man's reputation? He's trying to run a business, and you're out here making him look like he's reckless with money. I had to explain to 3 different clients why my car gifting habits weren't going to affect my ability to manage their accounts professionally. I added, because why not pile on at this point? One of them actually asked if I was financially stable enough to handle their portfolio. A guy who's been with my company for 5 years thought I might be having some kind of breakdown because his wife saw your post and told him I was making questionable personal decisions. Harper had tears in her eyes now, but I couldn't tell if they were genuine remorse tears or the manipulative kind she'd probably perfected over years of getting out of trouble by looking sad and pretty. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't know it would cause problems. You didn't know, I repeated slowly, that lying about someone buying you a $40,000 vehicle might cause problems. You didn't think that through. That didn't occur to you as a potential issue. Sophie finally spoke up, her voice small and defeated. Harper, how could you not see that was wrong? Because she doesn't think about consequences, Frank said, and there was something final in his tone, like a judge delivering a verdict. She never has. The table went quiet again, but this time it was different. This wasn't anticipatory silence. This was the silence of realization, of truth settling in, of everyone finally acknowledging what they'd probably known all along, but were too polite or too hopeful to say out loud. Harper sat there, tears streaming down her face, her perfect makeup running, and for the first time since she'd moved into my house 6 months ago, she looked genuinely small. And I wish I could say I felt bad about it. I wish I could say I felt guilty for exposing her like this in front of her family. But I didn't. Not even a little bit. Because sometimes, people need to see the truth, even when it's ugly. The thing about family dinners is that they always reach this critical moment. This point of no return where everything that's been simmering under the surface finally boils over, and you can either let it explode all over everyone or you can control the blast. I'd been controlling the blast for 6 months, carefully managing Harper's chaos like a bomb squad technician trying to defuse a device made entirely of entitlement and Instagram filters. But tonight I was done defusing. Tonight I was letting it explode, and honestly, it felt better than any therapy session I'd ever paid for. Harper stood up so fast her chair scraped against Linda's hardwood floor with that nails-on chalkboard screech that made everyone wince. Her mascara was running down her face in little black rivers. Her perfectly styled hair was starting to fall out of whatever complicated updo she'd spent an hour creating, and her whole carefully constructed image of the misunderstood victim was crumbling faster than a sandcastle in a tsunami. She pointed at me, literally pointed, like we were in a courtroom drama and she was identifying the accused, and her voice came out shrill and desperate. You're turning everyone against me. This is what you wanted, isn't it? You wanted to humiliate me in front of my own family. I stayed seated, calm as a monk in meditation, my hands folded on the table like I was about to lead a prayer. Harper, I didn't turn anyone against you. I just showed them bank statements and Instagram posts. You know, facts. Those pesky little things that exist whether we acknowledge them or not. You're twisting everything, she shrieked. and I could see the desperation in her eyes. The panic of someone whose carefully constructed lies are falling apart, and they're scrambling to grab the pieces before everyone sees what's underneath. You make me sound like some terrible person when I'm just trying to get my life together. For 6 months, I asked, raising one eyebrow. Because most people get their life together in, I don't know, a few weeks? Maybe a month or two. 6 months is less getting your life together and more establishing permanent residence in someone else's house while contributing nothing but attitude and audacity. That's when Sophie stood up, and I felt my stomach drop a little because I knew what was coming. She'd been quiet this whole time, processing, probably running through every conversation she'd had with Harper, every excuse she'd made on her sister's behalf, every time she'd asked me to be patient and understanding. But now she was standing, and her face had that determined look that meant she was about to defend her sister even though everything I'd said was objectively, provably true. "Ryan, that's enough," Sophie said, her voice steady but with an edge that could cut glass. "She's family. Yes, she made mistakes. Yes, she should have been more responsible. But you didn't have to do this. Not here, not like this." And there it was. The family card. The ultimate trump card in any domestic dispute. It didn't matter that I was right. It didn't matter that I had receipts, screenshots, bank statements, and 6 months of justified frustration. What mattered was that Harper was blood, and I was just the guy who married into this circus. I looked at Sophie, my wife, the woman I'd promised to love and support through everything, the person I'd built a life with, and I saw her standing there next to her sister, forming this united front against me like I was the villain in a story where I'd literally just been asking someone to pay rent and maybe wash a dish occasionally. The table was silent. Frank was staring at his plate like it might offer him guidance on how to handle this situation. Linda had her hand over her mouth, her eyes darting between her daughters and me like she was watching a tennis match where someone was about to get seriously injured. The candles were still flickering, the roast beef was getting cold, and somewhere in the house, a clock was ticking, marking the seconds of what was probably going to be remembered as that dinner in family lore for decades to come. I took a breath. Not a dramatic breath, not a frustrated sigh. Just a normal, regular breath of a man who'd finally reached his limit and was about to draw a line in the sand that would change everything. I leaned back in my chair, looked directly at Sophie, and said the sentence that would end this whole charade once and for all. "Then she can go live with her family, but not in my house." The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Simple, clear, non-negotiable. 7 words that contained 6 months of frustration, boundaries that should have been set a long time ago, and the final punctuation mark on Harper's extended vacation at Ryan's bed and breakfast for entitled relatives. Silence. Not the uncomfortable silence we'd been dealing with all night. Not the anticipatory silence before someone drops a bomb. This was the silence of absolute shock, the kind where everyone's brain is processing what they just heard and trying to figure out if they heard it correctly or if they need to ask for clarification. Sophie's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Harper stopped mid-crying fit, her face frozen in an expression of disbelief that would have been hilarious if I'd had any humor left in me at that moment. Linda's hand went from her mouth to her chest, like she was trying to keep her heart from jumping out of her body. And Frank leaned back in his chair, and I watched something shift in his expression. The disappointment in me that had been there all evening, that "why are you being so mean to our daughter" look, melted away and was replaced by something else. Understanding, maybe, or respect, or possibly just relief that someone had finally said what he'd been thinking for years but was too polite to vocalize. "He's got a point," Frank said quietly, and those 4 words felt like a judge banging a gavel and declaring case closed. Sophie whipped around to look at her father like he'd just betrayed her. "Dad, you can't be serious." "I'm very serious," Frank said, and his voice had that firm quality that fathers develop over years of having to make hard decisions and stick to them even when their kids are mad. "Ryan's right. If Harper needs help, she can come stay with us. We'll help her get on her feet. But he's been more than generous. And frankly, Sophie, you know I'm right." Harper made this sound. Not quite a sob, not quite a gasp, somewhere in between, and collapsed back into her chair like her strings had been cut. "I can't believe this," she whispered. "I can't believe my own family is siding with him over me." "We're not siding with anyone," Linda said gently. finally finding her voice, though it was shaky and uncertain. But honey, you have to understand. What Ryan's saying isn't unreasonable. You've been there for 6 months without paying rent. That's not fair to him or to your sister. But I'm family, Harper said again, like repeating it enough times would change the fundamental reality of the situation. Yes, I said calmly, you are family. Which is why I gave you 6 months instead of 6 weeks. Which is why I didn't charge you late fees or interest or any of the things a landlord would have done. Which is why I'm having this conversation at a family dinner instead of just changing the locks and putting your stuff on the lawn, which honestly would have been easier and definitely more satisfying. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and looked around the table at each of them. Frank, who was nodding slightly. Linda, who looked sad but understanding. Sophie, who still looked torn between loyalty to her sister and acknowledging reality. And Harper, who looked like her entire world had just imploded, which I guess it kind of had. I'm not the bad guy here, I said, my voice steady and calm, like I was explaining something to a child who wasn't quite getting it. I'm just the guy who expected basic adult behavior and reasonable contributions from someone living in his house. Revolutionary concept, I know. I picked up my wine glass, drained what was left, Linda's good wine, wasted on this disaster of an evening, and set it down gently on the table. It's not revenge, I said, looking directly at Harper, then at Sophie, then at Frank. It's rent and reality finally coming due. And with that, I walked out of the dining room, grabbed my coat from the rack by the door, and stepped out into the cold October night, leaving behind the wreckage of Harper's delusions and the uncomfortable truth that sometimes being family isn't enough of an excuse to be a freeloader. The drive home was quiet, and for the first time in 6 months, I felt like I could actually breathe. The following week played out like a dramatic indie film where the main character thinks they're the misunderstood hero, but everyone watching knows they're actually just kind of insufferable. Harper turned her exit from my house into a performance art piece titled The Tragedy of Being Asked to Act Like an Adult. And honestly, she committed to the bit with an enthusiasm I wish she'd applied to job hunting or basic household chores. Monday morning, I woke up to the sound of Adele's Someone Like You blasting through the house at a volume that probably violated several noise ordinances and definitely violated my right to drink coffee in peace. Harper had apparently decided that packing required a soundtrack of sad breakup songs, which was hilarious considering she wasn't breaking up with anyone. She was just being asked to pay rent like a normal human being. I found her in the guest bedroom surrounded by clothes, makeup, shoes, and enough designer shopping bags to stock a small boutique. She was moving in slow motion, holding up each item like it was a precious memory instead of that impulse buy crop top she'd worn exactly once before deciding it wasn't her vibe anymore. Need any boxes? I asked cheerfully from the doorway, because I'm helpful like that. She shot me a look that could have killed a small plant. I'm fine, she said coldly, turning back to her dramatic packing process that appeared to involve more posing than actual organizing. By Tuesday, the Instagram stories started. Oh, the Instagram stories. Harper had transformed her eviction, her voluntary departure from a toxic living situation, into social media content that would have made reality TV producers weep with joy. She posted photos of herself looking pensively out windows with captions like, "Sometimes the people closest to you reveal themselves when you least expect it," and learning that family isn't always blood, and my personal favorite, choosing peace over places that no longer serve my growth. I almost commented, choosing peace over paying rent, but Sophie caught me hovering over the keyboard and gave me that look, the one that said I'd won the battle, but should probably not napalm the remaining bridges while they were still smoldering. Wednesday brought what I now refer to as the Guilt Trip Express, a nonstop service from Sophie's mouth directly to my conscience. She cornered me in the kitchen while I was making coffee, which honestly should be illegal. Nothing good ever comes from serious conversations before caffeine. She's my sister, Ryan, Sophie said, her voice doing that thing where it's not quite accusing, but definitely not accusing. She made mistakes, but you didn't have to be so harsh about it. I looked at my wife, the woman I loved, the woman I'd built a life with, the woman who was somehow defending someone who'd been treating both of us like unpaid staff for 6 months, and I felt my resolve solidify like concrete setting in the hot sun. I know she's your sister, I said, measuring my words carefully like I was defusing a bomb made of feelings and family dynamics. That's exactly why I gave her a 6-month free trial of adulthood instead of the 2 weeks I would have given anyone else. That's why I'm not charging her back rent. That's why I didn't put her stuff on the lawn in garbage bags, which honestly would have been way more satisfying. Sophie opened her mouth to respond, then closed it, then opened it again like she was trying to find an argument that would work but couldn't quite locate one in her mental filing system. No TikTok videos blasting through the walls at volumes that could wake the dead and probably violate the Geneva Convention. No hairdryer running for 45 minutes straight like she was trying to dry the entire Amazon rainforest one strand at a time. No phone conversations conducted at maximum volume about people I didn't know having drama I didn't care about. Just silence. Beautiful, golden, absolutely perfect silence. I laid there in bed like a guy who'd just been released from prison, taking in the simple joy of not hearing someone else's existence echoing through my own house. Sophie was still asleep next to me, her face peaceful, probably dreaming about something that didn't involve mediating between her husband and her sister or explaining why expecting rent was actually reasonable behavior. I got up, padded downstairs in my pajamas, didn't even bother changing because guess what? My house, my rules, no judgment from the peanut gallery, and walked into the kitchen. The coffee maker was right where I left it, not pushed aside to make room for Harper's 17 different types of specialty teas that she never actually drank, but insisted on keeping because they were aesthetic. The counter was clear. The sink was empty. There were no dirty mugs with lipstick stains sitting there like archaeological evidence of someone's inability to load a dishwasher. I made coffee in peace. Actual peace. The kind of peace that poets write about and therapists charge $200 an hour to help you find. I opened the fridge and, holy crap, I could see everything. The Greek yogurt I'd bought 3 days ago was still there. Both containers, not mysteriously disappeared into Harper's. I'll replace it later, black hole of food theft. My sandwich stuff was untouched. The leftover Chinese food I'd been looking forward to eating for lunch was exactly where I'd left it, still in its container, not picked through and put back with 2 bites left like that somehow didn't count as eating it. For the first time in 6 months, I could actually hear peace. Not the absence of noise, but real peace. The sound of a home that belonged to the people living in it, not occupied territory being held hostage by someone's extended vacation from responsibility. The rest of the week continued in this weird, wonderful way. I'd come home from work and the house would be exactly how I left it. Mind-blowing concept, right? I'd put something down and it would still be there later. Revolutionary. The bathroom wasn't covered in enough hair products to stock a small salon. The shower drain wasn't clogged with enough hair to build a small animal. The towels stayed on the towel rack instead of migrating to someone's bedroom floor and living there until they developed sentience. Sophie and I started having actual conversations again instead of just strategic discussions about how to handle Harper's latest crisis or complaint or dramatic interpretation of a minor inconvenience. We talked about normal stuff, our jobs, our friends, what we wanted to do on the weekend, whether we should finally commit to getting that weird stain off the living room carpet or just buy a rug and call it interior design. One morning about a week after Harper's departure, I decided to make breakfast. Real breakfast. Not the grab a protein bar and run situation that had become my morning routine when I couldn't stand being in the kitchen long enough to actually cook because someone might appear and demand I make them something too. I made eggs, bacon, toast, the whole domestic breakfast spread that makes you feel like you're in a commercial for happy families and functional adults. Sophie came downstairs in her pajamas, looking confused and maybe slightly suspicious, like she thought this might be a trap. I set the plate down in front of her with probably too much satisfaction, and I couldn't help myself. "Guess who made breakfast now?" I said, smirking. She rolled her eyes, but I caught it. That little smile, the one she was trying to hide. The acknowledgement that, yeah, the air was lighter. The whole house was lighter. Like we'd been living under this heavy blanket of tension and obligation, and now someone had finally yanked it off, and we could breathe again. A week later, Frank called. I saw his name pop up on my phone and had a moment of panic. Was Harper coming back? Had she convinced them this was all my fault and I needed to apologize? Was I about to have to defend my stance on rent being a reasonable expectation for the millionth time? "Harper's renting a room downtown," Frank said without preamble, his voice matter-of-fact. Got herself a part-time job at some boutique. Retail stuff, but it's something. Good for her, I said, and I meant it. Not in a sarcastic way, but genuinely. Maybe adulthood fits her better than my guest room ever did. Frank chuckled, the sound tired but relieved. We'll see. She's already complained about having to work weekends. But hey, progress is progress. After we hung up, I stood in my quiet kitchen, coffee in hand, and smiled. Real progress. The kind you can feel in the air, in the peace, in the simple joy of being able to eat your own food in your own house, without someone acting like you owed them something for the privilege. Peace, I decided, wasn't just priceless. It was worth every uncomfortable conversation, every difficult boundary, every moment of being the bad guy who just wanted people to act like adults. Totally worth it. A month later, right before Christmas, I was living my best life. And by best life, I mean I was doing absolutely nothing special except enjoying the radical concept of existing in my own home without feeling like I was running a bed-and-breakfast for ungrateful relatives. The Christmas tree was up. Sophie and I had decorated it together without anyone complaining that we weren't using the right ornaments or that the tinsel wasn't distributed evenly enough. We'd watched bad holiday movies, eaten too many cookies, and had zero conversations about rent, responsibility, or why expecting basic human decency wasn't actually oppression. It was a Tuesday evening, because apparently Tuesdays were going to continue being the universe's chosen day for life-changing events in my world. I was on the couch in my most comfortable sweatpants, the ones with the hole in the knee that Sophie kept threatening to throw away, but I refused to part with because they'd achieved that perfect level of broken-in comfort that you can't buy in stores. I had a beer in one hand, the TV remote in the other, and absolutely no plans beyond watching whatever sports game was on and maybe ordering pizza later, because cooking felt like too much effort for a Tuesday. Then came the knock. Not a confident knock, not an aggressive knock, but a soft, hesitant knock, the kind of knock that says, "I'm not sure I should be here, but here I am anyway." It was so quiet I almost missed it over the sound of the TV, but I heard it, and something in my gut told me exactly who was on the other side of that door before I even got up to check. I opened it, and there she was. Harper, standing on my porch like a ghost of drama past. Except this ghost looked significantly different from the one who'd left a month ago with her designer bags and her attitude problem and her soundtrack of sad breakup songs. Her coat was too thin for December weather. One of those fashionable fall jackets that prioritized looking cute over actual functionality, which was very on-brand for Harper, except she wasn't posing or posturing or trying to look Instagram ready. She was just standing there, shivering slightly, her hands shoved in her pockets, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of the elaborate styles she used to spend hours creating. No dramatic makeup, no perfectly curated outfit, just Harper. Regular, normal, slightly cold Harper. Her expression was soft, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. Not the manipulative vulnerability she'd weaponized for 6 months, but actual vulnerability. The kind that comes from genuinely not knowing how something's going to go and being scared of the outcome, but showing up anyway. We stood there for a second, neither of us saying anything, the cold air from outside mixing with the warm air from inside, and creating this weird liminal space between past and present, between who we were a month ago and who we were now. "I got the job you recommended me for," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, nothing like the loud, confident demands I'd gotten used to hearing echo through my house. Wait, back up. The job I recommended her for? Here's something I didn't mention in all the drama and the dinner confrontations and the epic eviction saga. About 2 weeks after Harper left, I'd gotten a call from my buddy Marcus, who owned a marketing agency downtown. He was looking for someone to help with social media management, and despite everything, despite 6 months of frustration and rent drama and Instagram lies, I'd thought about Harper and her constant phone scrolling and her apparent expertise in crafting the perfect post to make her life look better than it actually was. I called Marcus back and said, "Look, I know someone who might be good for this. She's got her issues, but she knows social media better than anyone I've ever met. If you can get past the learning curve of teaching her that real jobs require actual work, she might surprise you." Marcus had laughed and said he'd give her a shot if she applied. I'd texted Harper the job listing, just the link, no explanation, no lecture, just information. She'd never responded, and I'd assumed she'd ignored it or decided it was beneath her or whatever rationalization she'd come up with. But apparently, she'd applied. And apparently, she'd gotten it. I know, I said, smiling. Not smugly, not sarcastically, just genuinely. Congrats. Marcus is a good guy. You'll learn a lot there. She shifted her weight from foot to foot, not quite meeting my eyes, looking down at her shoes like they might give her courage or at least a script for this conversation. I didn't know you'd recommended me until my first day. Marcus mentioned it, said you'd vouched for me, said you told him I had potential if someone gave me structure and expectations. I shrugged, leaning against the doorframe because standing up straight felt too formal for whatever this moment was turning into. I meant it. You're not stupid, Harper. You were just lazy and entitled and kind of insufferable, but not stupid. She laughed, actually laughed, this small, genuine sound that I'd never heard from her before. That's probably the nicest mean thing anyone's ever said to me. I'm gifted like that, I said. It's a talent. The smile faded from her face, replaced by something more serious, more raw. She took a breath, the kind of breath you take before jumping off a diving board or having a difficult conversation or admitting something you really don't want to admit. I'm sorry, Ryan, she said. And the words came out quiet but clear, no deflection, no excuses, no but, or however, or you have to understand. Just sorry. Plain and simple, and possibly the first time I'd heard those words from her mouth in a context that didn't involve her being sorry for herself. I looked at her. Really looked at her, not as the annoying freeloader who'd made my life difficult for 6 months, but as a person who'd maybe, finally, started to figure some things out. She looked tired, but it was a different kind of tired than before. Not the exhausted from doing nothing tired, but the tired that comes from actually working, from actually trying, from actually being a functioning adult in the real world. I nodded slowly, choosing my words carefully because this felt like one of those moments that matters, that shapes how things go from here. Then start by being kind to yourself, I said. Real kindness, not the fake self-care Instagram version. Pay your bills. Do your work. Stop trying to convince everyone your life is perfect and just focus on actually building something real. Rent's cheaper that way. She smiled, faintly, but it was genuine, not the practiced smile she used to give when she wanted something. That's very philosophical for a guy in sweatpants with a hole in them. These are designer holes, I said, deadpan. Very intentional. Cost extra. She laughed again, and this time it felt easier, lighter. We stood there for another moment, and I could feel something shifting, settling, like a book closing on one chapter so another one could start. I should go, she said, stepping back from the door. I just wanted to say thank you. For the job reference. And for everything else, I guess. Even the stuff I was mad about at the time. Don't make me regret it, I said, but I smiled so she'd know I was mostly kidding. Marcus is a good guy, but he'll fire you if you pull any of that watching over the house nonsense. I'm learning, she said, turning to walk down the porch steps. Slowly, but I'm learning. I watched her walk to her car, a beat-up Honda Civic that had definitely seen better days, probably belonged to a friend or was a rental, nothing like the Audi she'd pretended I'd given her. She got in, gave me a small wave through the windshield, and drove away. I closed the door, and the warm air of my house wrapped around me like a blanket. Sophie appeared from the kitchen, leaning against the doorway with this expression I couldn't quite read. You handled that better than I closed the door, and the warm air of my house wrapped around me like a blanket. Sophie appeared from the kitchen, leaning against the doorway with this expression I couldn't quite read. You handled that better than I expected, she said. I grinned, walking back toward the couch and my abandoned beer that was probably warm by now, but I didn't care. Revenge is overrated. Turns out, peace is priceless, and watching people actually grow up is kind of satisfying in its own way. Sophie smiled, really smiled, and came to sit next to me on the couch. Think she'll actually make it? Maybe, I said, putting my arm around her and pulling her close. Or maybe she'll flame out in 3 months, and we'll get another dramatic Instagram story about toxic work environments. Either way, not my circus, not my monkeys anymore. Later that night, I made dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta and sauce. And as I set the plates on the table, just 2 of them, not 3, I felt it again. That peace. That simple, profound satisfaction of living in a house where everyone contributes, where everyone respects each other, where breakfast tastes better because I'm only making it for people who appreciate it. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt exactly the way it should.